The Flash has been a part of my life for almost a decade by this point. I still remember when I first sat down to watch season 1 in December of 2015, and instantly I was transfixed. I was obsessed. I was joining in forum posts on the subreddit, I was talking about it with friends that I forced to watch the show. I watched hundreds of Emergency Awesome and Pagey videos every week, consuming as much as I could about the show. I looked at set leaks, theories, I wrote fan fiction. I was out of control. In fact, when I first sat down to make content on YouTube that wasn't tied to Let's Plays of Roblox or Sonic games, it was for a trailer breakdown of The Flash Season 3's final chunk of episodes. I remember writing a review for The Flash Season 3 finale all the way back in 2017. This long preamble was mainly just to explain how much this show means to me. If Supernatural is my favorite show because it was there when I needed it, The Flash is what has defined me. It was the first piece of media that I truly and absolutely loved, and it's the reason that I watch TV show and movies to this day, as well as being the primary factor as to why I'm making content right now. It's definitely not a stretch to say that people don't really care for the show. I can't say that I don't understand why. It's a CW show about a comic book character. We're not talking high art here, but I hope to bring a new perspective and dive into my reasons for genuinely still adoring the show through and through. I think a general consensus is that the show continued to produce seasons with diminishing returns, with each season being slightly worse than the last until plummeting off a cliff. I don't agree with that, as you might have seen from some prior videos of mine, but what I will agree with is that the show is not at all a consistent show when it comes to quality. It's not a situation like Supernatural, where I could say that the first 5 seasons are brilliant and then you can just stop. The Flash is a roller coaster that takes you through several high points of adrenaline before crashing down to one of the lowest points you've ever been. That being said, I like some seasons that other people hate, and I hate some seasons that other people love. But please, stick with me and let me share my perspectives like I did for Supernatural. With 9 seasons and over 180 episodes, I think it's time that I quit beating around the bush and instead start talking about the show that I love and watch with my dad every single night, and then watch with one of my best friends, Zach, every night until its conclusion last year. Buckle up. If you thought Supernatural was a wild ride, you just have to wait until this one. Season 1 is often regarded as the best season of the show, and yeah, I definitely get it. While it may take an episode or two for things to get into gear after the incredible pilot episode, it's not hard to see why people love this season as much as they do. It balances heart with spectacle, and just a really good mystery that makes you want to keep watching from the pilot until the end of the season. It's really that main plot and mystery where I respect season 1 the most. The show handles what it's trying to do very well. It both wastes no time and also doesn't burn out of its storyline too quickly. 23 episodes is a lot of time, and when botched, it can lead to a slog of a season. The fact that Joe begins to investigate Wells as early as episode 5 is such a cool little thing to do, and it's never to the point where you feel like you know too much, but you're also fed enough crumbs every episode to continuously be invested and excited to see more. And part of that is due to the pacing of the season, which is just great. The first half of the season is entirely villain of the week, and that might seem annoying at first, especially because pretty much every one of these villains is terribly underwritten. But I think they serve a really strong purpose in the main narrative and character work of Barry Allen. All of them are utilized and meant for Barry to push himself to become better. Multiplex means that he has to think about who he goes after. He can't just have one target, he has many, and it teaches him to go up against as many foes as he might end up seeing. He literally can't hit the mist, so he's got to focus on other ways to stop him that don't involve punching. Captain Cold can slow him down, and he even leads Barry to the first person that he failed to save. Girder is not only great for Barry to take down because he's his childhood bully, but it's great for him to take down because he learns a really cool punch. All of this culminates in episode 7, the first episode where Barry loses his speed. Get used to it. It happens every single season, multiple times a season, but the first time it happens here is a great cap-off to Barry's little origin story, and I think it allows him to grow as a character, solving problems without his speed. It's also just a cool episode because it's a little crossover with Arrow, but I'm not going to talk too much about crossovers in this video. I mean, this is before the show began to utilize a pod-like format that would be known as graphic novels. This is still one single season with one single storyline, but it is split up in a way that could honestly be viewed like little arcs. Again, the first 7 episodes feel like the origin of Barry Allen, with the next chunk being a small firestorm arc starting with the end of the crossover Flash vs. Arrow. Caitlin witnesses her dead fiancé in a much different form than she last saw him, Starting with episode 10, basically every episode has a Firestorm side plot, all based around Ronnie Raymond's return. It's kind of crazy though when you know that Ronnie ends up coming back as the corporeal form of the ancient space god of death, Deathstorm, 7 years later. All of this Firestorm rummaging culminates in a pretty strong two-parter with The Nuclear Man and Fallout. While I don't love Ronnie, and I especially think it's a little dumb for him to have an entire arc to his resurrection, only for him to leave immediately after, I do think that the storyline was so finely woven that it's hard to really complain. I mean, the villain of episode 11, Hartley Rathaway, even sticks around for episode 12 to show Cisco what happened to Ronnie. The good news is that if you're not sold on Ronnie Raymond and Caitlin Snow's romance and resurrection plot, the Reverse Flash storyline is basically moving at full speed too. The B-plot in the Firestorm two-parter involves Joe and Cisco investigating the murder of Barry's mother, including Joe spilling that he thinks that Wells is behind it. We also get the reveal that Barry is capable of time travel, and the entirety of Fallout deals with the ramifications of that. I think it's really cool then that the next episode does exactly what it does. I genuinely think that Out of Time, episode 15, is one of the single most important episodes of the entire show. While it's not my favorite of the season due to some pretty bad drama and romance side plots that can often bog it down, it's a really strong episode when it comes to plot developments and how it pushes the season forward. Not only is it awesome because we get immediate payoff to Barry learning that he'll eventually time travel, the way the show uses time travel is just genius. You see, we're at episode 15 of 23, and by this point, the season needs to start showing some of its cards, or else viewers are going to get bored. We already know that from episode 9 that Wells is the Reverse Flash, so the next logical step is to let the viewers in on that. The problem is that we've still got 8 episodes after that, and that's a lot of time to have a completely unveiled main villain. So, what do? You have Cisco become skeptical of Wells after Joe said to him in a prior episode that he thinks he's the Reverse Flash. It gets to a point where he realizes their trap for Wells in episode 9 was tampered with, leading him to ask Caitlin to get Wells out of Star Labs for the day. Upon doing so, Caitlin's stalling fails, and Wells reunites with Cisco in Star Labs, reveals his origin, name, and master plan, before killing Cisco in cold blood. All the while, Mark Martin, the Weather Wizard, is on a revenge plan that involves wiping out all of Central City with a huge tidal wave, one that Barry has to run around to stop, only for him to move so fast that he goes back in time, undoing every single reveal of the episode, including him confessing his love to Iris. Now, this should suck. This should be a complete and total jump the shark moment. The show just revealed everything and then promptly undid it. You should be mad as a viewer. How dare they do that? Does the show not contain any stakes? And yet, not only does it work, it's like awesome. It's the best thing the show ever did. I can't explain how it works, but I think it has to do with the fact that within the show's universe, there's a concept of time fighting back, and it definitely does in the following episode. Cisco's brother is attacked by the rogues who show up in the absence of Weather Wizard. Barry gets into hot water with Iris since he believes the kiss they shared in the aborted timeline has any relevance to this timeline whatsoever. And by the end of the episode, Barry is the one to piece together that Wells might not be a good guy, primarily because the main person investigating Wells was taken off the board, so to speak. I think this is a really great idea because even though we reset everything, we still move things forward enough with Barry being the one to want to investigate Wells now. Things are still moving forward, and we get to keep all the knowledge that we have as a viewer. The following episodes do a nice mixture of feet dragging alongside strong developments. Episode 17 is a really great episode as Barry knows now that Wells is lying and is most likely the Reverse Flash. It all comes to a head in a great climax as Barry needs to put his faith in the man that murdered his mother in order to survive. All the while, we get some really great flashbacks to see how Eobard Thawne took over Harrison Wells' body, as well as Barry revealing to Eddie that he's the Flash. I think this episode is one of my absolute favorites of the season, and it's one of those episodes that when you look back on it, you're like, is the Tricksters episode really that good? But no, it honestly is. I do think episode 18, All-Star Team Up, slams on the brakes a little too hard. It's not a terrible episode, but it screams filler, especially after episode 17 did so much to move things forward. 19 and 20 fixed that, though, with the introduction of Cisco's powers, and then the full reveal at the end of episode 20 and one of the season's most stunning scenes is a great way to push the season forward. I also have to mention how great the scene is where they enter the time vault for the first time and Barry sees that future newspaper, It's just an awesome payoff from something that we've seen as far back as episode 1. I think the final stretch of the season is just as terrific as everything that came before it, honestly. While episode 21 might feel like a detour with Gorilla Grodd, and it definitely is, I do still think that it adds a ton of great character work for Eobard Thawne and all of the characters as they search for the missing Eddie. Episode 22 is actually basically your normal finale that you usually get, including the final fight between the hero and the big bad. All of that is so that episode 23 can dial back on superheroics and focus on what the show arguably always did best, and that's the characters. Fast Enough, for the longest time, was my favorite episode of the show, and on some levels I do still think it is. It's a bold move making your season finale essentially all in epilogue. Thawne gives Barry a choice in the opening. He can save his mother. The entire episode is just a question of should he. Barry gets to talk to everybody, and everybody has a different opinion, and he ultimately decides to do it, but realizes in the last moment that everything he's gained isn't worth losing. That's not to say that the episode doesn't have iconic or bombastic moments. While it's extremely sad and heartbreaking for Barry to say goodbye to his mother instead of saving her, the moment is seared into every fan of the show's mind as one of the defining moments of it. What follows is also a main reason that people hold this finale in such esteem. The final 10 minutes include the death of Eddie Thawne as he kills himself to erase Eobard Thawne from existence, and it's a great and bombastic moment that just, wait, Barry just made a decision not to erase the last 15 years of his life, only so that Eddie could kill himself, erase Eobard from existence, which would then in turn make it so that Thawne never killed Nora Allen, and would then make Nora Allen alive, and in turn undo the last 15 years. Except that doesn't happen. Keep that in the back of your mind. That's going to be on the test. The heart of the show is on full display in season 1. And I absolutely love it. Every character is so well realized. Barry is a terrific lead, and Grant Gustin, despite a few missteps in his performance here and there, is still great at doing all that he needs to do. You feel every bit of anguish he goes through, and he sells being a superhero more than basically anyone else in the Arrowverse. Tom Cavanaugh's Reverse Flash is also a key part about what makes this season tick. You even feel like a viewer as you get suckered into liking him. Every time I rewatch the season, I get upset because I just love this guy so much. His clear care for not only Barry, but Caitlin and Cisco and the entirety of Central City makes him such a compelling villain. Because deep beneath all of that is the same narcissistic speedster that hates Barry for just existing. Cisco and Caitlin are also really, really great. I'm genuinely surprised at how good a character of Caitlin is this season, especially because of how much I don't like her in the later seasons. She has pathos, she's well written, Daniel Panabaker actually gave enough of a shit not to sleepwalk through every performance. Before the days of Killer Frost, Caitlin Snow is actually an integral piece of the puzzle. And you know, Cisco starts out as a generic little tech guy and grows into Barry's best friend in such a believable and cool way. And when he gets powers, it's pretty awesome that it pays off how much he wants to be a superhero. Joe is a terrific mentor figure for Barry, and he gets a lot of standout moments in the season, not just as an investigator, but also as a father figure. I love how he investigates well super early in the season, and I love how it just all pays off by the end of it. Iris will become a lot more prevalent in the show as it goes on, but it wasn't until writing the script that I realized she doesn't actually have a lot going on in the show's debut season. Her plots connected to Barry and the Streak and her blog are all solid enough, but never elevate beyond subplot material, and it's quite fascinating to see where she starts as a character compared to where she ends up by the end of the show. She's mainly relegated to the drama and romance, which I am not a fan of. Yeah, the drama sucks. It just does. I know it's a CW show, I know, but man, is it just not good here. The Barry, Iris, and Eddie love triangle is just not interesting to me, and you're never really given a reason to care. Barry and Linda's romance just feels temporary since you know that Iris and Barry are going to end up together, and there's so many moments that just really feel forced. A prime example of that is in episode 13, an episode that I praised earlier. Barry and Linda are making out, and Barry gets a call that he needs to leave for Flash stuff. He says some things about how he needs to go, mumbles, and then flakes on her, just seeming like a total jackass. Now, I'm not saying that Barry should tell his new girlfriend that he's the Flash, but did the writers forget that he's, I don't know, a cop? And maybe he would just have cop duties that would crop up? And maybe he could use that to get out of the situation. Oh no, okay, we need Linda to be mad at him. Gotcha, makes sense. And it's not really just the relationship drama that I feel is a little weak this season. There's also just normal character drama that I find hard to get into. In episode 4, when Barry's so angry he straight up lashes out at Cisco and storms off, it doesn't really have any real resolution beyond them just apologizing to each other and moving on. The show always has to resolve its drama in a neat little bow by the end of the episode, and I think it hinders the overall storytelling potential of the drama. Some of the best drama that we do get in this season is the stuff that lasts multiple episodes, like Joe's suspicion of Wells and the rift that brings into Team Flash, or the stuff revolving around Hartley Rathaway in episodes 11 and 12. If you can't tell, I really love season 1. I think it's one of the most well-realized main plots of probably any network TV show. I don't really think that while the drama is poor, that it detracts from how much of the season is just such a damn good superhero product. I give season 1 of The Flash a 9 out of 10. The Flash Season 2 is considered by many fans to not only be as good as Season 1, but in some cases better. I don't agree with this. Now don't get me wrong, and please stay with me here, I do not think Season 2 is bad. In fact, I honestly get why so many people love it. It does a lot of the same things Season 1 does, but bigger. It's a grander story, the villain is more threatening, and the whole season carries an air of bigger and badder sequel. But it's those elements that actually make Season 2 worse than Season 1 for me. It just honestly ends up feeling like a lesser version of the show's debut season. From the very first minutes of the Season 2 premiere, something already just feels off about Season 2. The first scene is a dreamlike sequence of Barry stopping Captain Cold and Heatwave before we return to Star Labs and we see Eddie and Wells, two dead characters by this point. That one scene kind of just describes how I feel about most of the first half of the season. It just feels off. Episodes 1 and 2 struggle to find a really coherent status quo. The introduction of Jay Garrick in Earth 2 is fascinating and really cool, but it's never really enough to keep you invested. And the promise of a cool speedster villain in Zoom is never delivered upon until episode 6 with Enter Zoom, the first episode of the season that I actually think is really strong. Unfortunately, that's all we get on the Zoom front until episode 13, and the first half of the season is dedicated entirely to setting up Legends of Tomorrow, and in doing so, depriving the season of much needed time to seed and develop storyline. Like I said, Season 2 is a retread of Season 1. It's clear they wanted the first half to be a bit more standalone from the upcoming Zoom threat, but the problem is that they failed to realize what made the first 7 or so episodes of Season 1 so compelling. Gone are the episodes where Barry learns and grows from one-off rogues that he fights, and in their places are episodes full of botched and uninteresting setup for a show that I honestly never really cared about past its second season. Yes, I understand this is a shared universe, but did we really need to spend so much time on setting this show up? Episode 3 is pretty solid, I'll admit, but it does exist purely to set Snart up to be able to be in Legends of Tomorrow. I feel like the Fury of Firestorm is actually one of the worst episodes of the show, and one of the first actually bad episodes that we get up until this point. Firestorm was an interesting and monumental part of Season 1, and it was cool to see the status quo shift after Ronnie's death taking down the Singularity. Unfortunately, all we're treated to is Martin Stein, the brain of Firestorm, short-circuiting, and the team needing to find a replacement for Legends of Tomorrow. The episode attempts to go for a message, but it honestly just fails to me. Caitlin's dismissal of Jefferson because he's a football player comes across as oddly racist, and the idea that just because Hewitt is a scientist, he's a better fit, doesn't really work and resonate with me. I think the biggest hit is when at the end of the episode, Firestorm simply leaves again. Cool, that's the second time in the show that we've spent multiple episodes on a character just to have said character fly off. I really don't understand what the whole point of Firestorm was for this show, if they were never going to keep him around as a recurring member of Team Flash. The issue is also seen in the character of Kendra, who turns out to be the Arrowverse incarnation of Hawkgirl. Cisco and her begin a romance, and it's not a terrible romance. Unfortunately though, this romance only serves to set up Legends of Tomorrow. It was never going to go anywhere beyond the first half of the season, and once they abandon it, it feels like it didn't really matter at all. I also want to state that the season really paints a clear divide when it comes to shared universes. Season 1 managed to have a shared universe in a really cool way, utilizing its connection to Arrow neatly. Characters like Felicity would show up for a one-off episode, or Joe and Cisco travel to Starling City and meet Laurel and Quentin Lance, and it's a nice way of reminding you that you're in a shared continuity. On the opposite side, Season 2 falls into the trap that a lot of MCU and DCEU projects did, where they spend more time setting up things than they do telling their own story. Just because you have a shared universe doesn't mean you need to waste precious time in a self-contained narrative to push that new project forward. It's not that the first half of Season 2 is necessarily devoid of any plot relevancy. I mentioned Enter Zoom earlier, and we get a solid set of 2 episodes in the form of The Darkness and the Light alongside Enter Zoom. These episodes work nicely together and revisit the character of Linda Park, who honestly kind of sucks, and place her in a position that I think is really cool. Episode 5 focuses on her Earth 2 doppelganger who escapes by the end, leading to Team Flash deciding to utilize Linda as a trap to lure Zoom in. It's a great moment for Barry and shows that he's kind of lost his fucking mind following the events of Season 1. He wants so badly to stop Zoom that he's taking his ex-girlfriend and turning her into a glorified fish bait to lure a psychopathic killer to Earth 1. His plan works, and he gets his ass beat deservedly, and then Zoom decides to saunter off into the plot dimension where he'll remain until episode 13. Those 2 episodes are the only real development that we get in the first 9 of the season. Oh, we at least have the mid-season finale, right? The episode was huge for season 1. It had the stakes, it set everything up for the Reverse Flash conflict, it revealed so much of the main villain. Season 2 has got to be great. We're going to see another fight with Zoom and Barry, and it's just going to be awesome. Oh, it's a filler episode. Weather Wizard breaks Captain Cold and the Trickster out of Iron Heights, and we're treated to a fun romp that ultimately doesn't contribute anything. And listen, I am not against filler episodes. I like this episode, it's actually really good, but by this point something needs to have happened. The Velocity Serum plot that they were brewing has gone nowhere, the Zoom conflict, like I've said a million times already, has gone nowhere, and all of the characters are practically standing still. The episode is called Running to Stand Still after all. And on the topic of the season and the show spinning its wheels, we need to talk about Patty Spivot. There's this big idea and concept going around for some reason that Patty is a better love interest to Barry than Iris. I don't know what the hell people are talking about. Don't get me wrong, she's a solid character, and I don't mind her brief fling with Barry in theory, but much like the Linda romance of season 1, it just serves to be another annoying romance that Barry messes up because he can't reveal his identity to her. Okay, so what's the point of these little filler romances if they're just going to end in unnatural ways just so Barry and Iris can get married? I think the main reason that Patty leaves in the way that she does is because Andrew Kreisberg returned to the show after starting Supergirl halfway through season 2. He didn't really like the character of Patty and just kind of wanted to ship her out of the way, which, knowing what he did to other people, a little foreboding, but we'll talk about that later. Now that we've talked about all the structural issues and the issues with romances and everything just kind of not going anywhere, we need to talk about Zoom. Much like the structure of the season, season 2 borrows heavily from season 1 when it comes to its main villain. He's Reverse Flash 2, except he's more evil, more scary, more bombastic, and he's from Earth 2 instead of the future. He's masked with a secret identity and he wants Barry's speed for a personal goal. It's just a shame that he lacks really any character whatsoever. It's okay for a masked antagonist to simply coast on being cool. Not to delve much into Arrow in my Precious Flash video, but Prometheus is also a fairly bland villain. The difference is once he's unmasked, the character goes pretty hard, and the same concept just cannot be said for Zoom in my opinion. For one, it's so clear that Jay Garrick was never meant to be Zoom. The story just does not line up. They try and retcon it as soon as we get to the second half of the season by pointing out that Jay Garrick's Earth 1 doppelganger is named Hunter Zolomon. The answer the show comes up with to explain away these issues is time remnants. What are time remnants, you ask? Well, I'm sure if you've seen the show that you know what those are, but the show actually provides us 2 explanations. So remember how I said that when Eddie killed himself, Eobard Thawne's erasure from time should erase the events of the show up until that point? Well, the show realized that and gave us an explanation. The time remnant. In episode 11 of the season, a version of Eobard Thawne from before he killed Barry's mother arrived in the present day and was able to exist because he was from a time before he got erased, preserved by the Speed Force. I guess it works. The Speed Force is an otherworldly thing that can give people speed powers. I really don't require much logic from this show. However, in episode 18, Zoom tells the team that he was able to kill himself and still exist because he made a time remnant. He went back in time a few seconds ago and brought that exact version to the present. The difference in time between them is so minuscule that one of them dying doesn't affect the timeline in any way. Okay, it's a little convoluted, but I guess it makes sense. Except that isn't what Harry Wells explained when he was talking about Reverse Flash. These are 2 separate time travel mechanics, yet they're given the same name. I guess both are technically timeline remnants, but they're functionally different in how they exist. Another thing I see brought up countless times is that people claim Jay was always a time remnant from the beginning of the season, and that's how Zoom and Jay were in separate places at once. That's simply not true. In episode 18, Zoom tells the team that he decided to make a timeline remnant only when they were going to Earth 2 without him. That was the first time he made one, and no sooner than that. And then there's the issue of when Jay arrives, he's tested on by Team Flash, who says they found no trace of metahuman physiology remaining, aside from some past regenerative capabilities. I think this is an issue though, because Zoom is technically still a metahuman. While the velocity serum that he took to boost his speed severed his connection to the Speed Force, he would still show signs of being a metahuman. Unless Team Flash was just testing for the Speed Force residue, in which case, are they stupid? And look, I'd be able to ignore all these issues with consistency and the storyline not making sense if I found Zoom to be a compelling villain, and I honestly just don't. Again, Zoom lacks any semblance of a character beyond evil serial killer. That again in concept is okay. I don't need every villain to have some sappy backstory. Sometimes it's cool when they're just evil. My issue is that Zoom and Barry have no real rivalry, and by the time the show attempts to create one, it falls completely flat. Zoom is painted as this mirror version of Barry. His father actually did kill his mother, and in doing so sent Hunter down an extremely dark path. It's an idea that works, but again, wasn't Reverse Flash already just bad Flash? Zoom's entire character going forward is all about him wanting to turn Barry into him. He kills Barry's father to turn him into him. He makes Barry watch a city fall to turn him into him. Except inherently, the idea doesn't work. Barry already had what happened to Hunter happen to him, and he overcame it and became a superhero and one of the best superheroes to exist. Zoom's characterization gets a little bit better in the final stretch. Around episode 21, Teddy Sears stops trying to be menacing and instead turns into a complete cartoon of a villain.
What are you up to?
No good.
He quips, he has jokes, and the performance is pure camp, and you know what? I love it. Zoom by the finale isn't even the same villain that he was in the first 20 episodes of the show. He's talking about Barry bringing in a fan club. He's so gleefully evil that it's actually fun to watch for once. Not to mention Zoom's plan is incomprehensible and downright middling at best. See, Reverse Flash had a simple goal. It was to get home. He needed to train the Flash to be fast enough to break through time and send him home. It's compelling because, while simple, it's a normal and reasonable goal to have. When we start season 2, we find out that Zoom wants Barry's speed. Why? Oh, because he's dying and it'll heal him. Okay, then that makes sense, but then he gets Barry's speed in episode 18, so what next? Okay, turns out he wants to destroy the entire multiverse, but they're going to wait until the penultimate episode to tell you that. A lot of the issues with the final stretch of the season could honestly be fixed by not wasting so much time in the earlier episodes. Barry giving up his speed to save Wally isn't exactly the most well-written reason to do so, but having Barry without his speed for a few episodes was a cool idea. It's just a shame that it amounts to basically only 2 episodes, and then we're already back to business as usual. It never has any time to sink in, just like Jay's death. We're given the Zoom reveal 2 episodes later with no time to process it. It doesn't help that Jay's death already didn't really have a big sting to it, because the character was kind of boring and just dwaddled around up until that point. I think they were trying to take him in a different direction before they decide to make him Zoom, and it ends up just hurting the entire season overall. I think the finale is another major sore spot in the season for me. Don't get me wrong, I like the finale, it's fun. It just has some issues with it. Episode 21 is a great episode for Barry to accept what happened to his mother, move past it, and the expansion that provides to the Speed Force lore is really cool. Episode 22 is whatever, but I think it sets up the finale to be action-packed and fun. I think it spends a bit too much time spinning its wheels, much like the season itself, but I think the climax is really cool. My only major issue is that the season had run out of steam for the plot by this point, and I just didn't really care about anything Zoom was trying to do. Honestly, you could have just got rid of the entire Magnetar stuff, and just had Zoom pissed that Barry had his speed back and he wanted to kill him. It could have been really cool just to have an episode where Zoom wants to kill the Flash and he's not stopping at anything to do it. Unfortunately, that's not what we get, and Zoom wants to basically do Crisis on Infinite Earths 4 seasons too early. It doesn't help that I also think the cliffhanger is pretty bad and completely invalidates episode 21 and everything Barry learned in that one. Okay, I've spent a very long time talking about things that I dislike. Would you believe me if I said I do still like this season? Because I do. For all my complaining about the main storyline of Zoom, I think the season is able to be enjoyable without that, mainly through a lot of its standout episodes. While I have issues with the first half feeling like filler, a lot of those episodes are fairly entertaining. I mentioned the darkness and the light in Enter Zoom being really solid. Episode 3 is a great episode with Barry and Snart having to go undercover together to stop Start's dad, and Guerrilla Warfare is a really enjoyable Grodd episode. And the middle of the season is actually really strong. I haven't talked about Harry Wells a lot yet, but I love him, and I think the middle of the season is where he just absolutely shines. It was a bold decision to keep Tom Cavanaugh around on the show after season 1, and to make him an Earth 2 doppelganger was such a cool idea. It's also cool how much of a jackass he is. I mean, in episode 12, he betrays the team because he's working with Zoom. He works in his own self-interests, and he's completely self-serving, and it's refreshing to see a character like him in a show like The Flash. I think the season also pushes itself to be crazier and cooler, and it shows up in a lot of really awesome ways. Reverse Flash returning is a bonkers idea on its own, and it works within the season, giving us one of the best episodes of it in the Reverse Flash Returns. We get Barry fighting a CGI shark, as well as an episode where Barry travels back in time to talk to Thawne and learn how to get faster. All of these are some of the best episodes, and they like honestly stack up pretty well against season 1. Including the two-parter on Earth 2, because I think that might just be the peak of the season. I love seeing the alternate Earth, and Zoom is probably at his most menacing here, even if he still just sits around and talks about how evil he is. This two-parter feels like a better mid-season finale than the one that we actually got. The introduction of Wally West is also a really solid way to ramp up the show's mythology. While it might feel like he was haphazardly inserted, I think the way they go about it is a fresh take on the story and gave Joe and Iris a lot of good things to do. The plot starts terribly, though. I genuinely think having Joe's dead wife secretly be alive is one of the worst decisions the show has ever made, but the commencing drama with Iris, Joe, and Wally is actually really strong. The characters also continue to remain compelling throughout the season. Barry is given a lot of good character work to work through this season, whether it's getting over the events of the season 1 finale, or struggling to find and succeeding to trust Jay, only to get blindsided. I think a lot of it works to push his character forward. I do think Caitlin struggles a bit. We get introduced to Killer Frost on Earth 2, and so they're clearly setting something up with that, but they don't really want to commit to it, and she's only really utilized as a love interest for Jay, and her kind of PTSD arc after Zoom kidnaps her is solid enough, but she just feels a little underserved by the end of the season. Cisco gets a lot of cool stuff too, as we see him slowly transform into Vibe throughout the season, and I love the inclusion of his doppelganger Reverb. It added a bit of depth to his transition into full-blown superhero, and I have to applaud that. I don't think there's a noticeable step down in episode quality consistently throughout the season. There's a couple episodes that are pretty bad here and worse than even the worst of season 1 has to offer, but I think that at its core, the show is still the same in season 2 that it was in season 1. It's just a little more uneven and a little more unfocused. Season 2 is not a bad season of the show. It's completely tonally balanced too, being able to take itself seriously while also carrying the heart of the Flash on its sleeve and serving up comic booky moments. At its best, it retains the heart and joy of the series' debut season and comes across as a more confident outing, but at its worst, it's a boring retread of the season that came before it without realizing what made that season so special. At the end of the day, I give season 2 a 7.5 out of 10. Okay, if people like this season, more power to you. Honestly, I'm glad that you enjoy it. You see something in it that I don't, and I'm sure as we dive deeper into this retrospective, you'll realize that I too see things in seasons that other people don't. All I'm here to do today is talk about why this season really disappointed me. You see, The Flash Season 3 is about many things. Heartbreak, love, power, love conquering hate, but most importantly, and this is the one thing the season is consistently about, Season 3 is about wasting potential. From the very first episode, it's clear that the show doesn't really feel interested in following through on anything. I still think that the Flashpoint storyline is a solid enough premiere and probably the best version of the story that's been told, but that's not saying much considering I think the story itself is quite bad. More on that here and here. Point is, the show speeds, no pun intended, through something that could have easily lasted 4 or 5 episodes, and instead we're back with the normal status quo. I wouldn't be as upset if the show didn't undo Barry's development at the end of season 2 just to do the story and then do nothing with it. What was the point? And don't give me nonsense about how Flashpoint caused Savitar or anything like that, because that doesn't make any sense. I'll talk about Savitar more later, but if I had issues with Zoom, you guys aren't ready for what I have to say about Savitar. The first half of season 3 really struggles to come up with a compelling status quo for the show. It doesn't help that the first couple episodes of season 3 just aren't very good. There's a noticeable pep in the step missing that you didn't really have from season 2. I mean, season 2 didn't start amazingly, but the quality never felt like it does at the beginning of season 3. Once we exit the premiere, the season's just on really shaky ground and never really gives you an episode that you can be like, hey, that was really good. A lot of it is just, I guess I'm watching The Flash. The main villain of the first half of the season is Alchemy, and he's creating metahumans that had powers in the Flashpoint timeline. I think that's a cool enough idea, but Alchemy doesn't have anything beyond looking and sounding cool. This is compounded on by having him secretly be Julian Albert, the season's newest character. Not only was this so clear from the get-go, but Julian is an absolutely terrible character. He starts out as an antagonistic coworker of Barry's and one that will inevitably lighten up to him. Him being Dr. Alchemy is whatever. I don't care for it, but it's not terrible. It's just that once he's revealed to be Alchemy, nothing ever comes of it. He suddenly just becomes a cheerleader for Caitlin and goes back to London by the end of the season. After his reveal, they completely drop the villain of Alchemy or him being an acolyte of Savitar or anything like that. In fact, they just don't do anything with Savitar's acolytes at all throughout the season, but did we accomplish anything with him? Dr. Alchemy is one of the Flash's coolest rogues, and instead he's just this. I mean, yet again, it's wasting potential. And speaking of Caitlin, we deal with Killer Frost rearing her ugly head for for the first time on Earth 1. And I will say, some of the drama we get with Caitlyn is interesting enough, but I find her, if I use my powers, I'll turn evil struggle to be extremely dumb. Honestly, the best episode of Season 3's first half is the Killer Frost episode, and that really should have been the blueprint from where to take the character going forward. She should have just remained evil from that episode throughout the rest of the season, and honestly could have been a more compelling main villain for the season than Savitar. If you want to watch me bitch more about Killer Frost, I have a lovely video about that for you, so you can click that right here. I mentioned in my Season 1 review that Iris lacked a lot of character, and I do think that improved a ton in Season 2. Her storylines with Joe and Wally were fantastic, and her journey into becoming a journalist was really well done. Unfortunately, this season decides that she should just be an object that Barry needs to save, and the show tries to give her some agency. I won't ignore its attempts, but they're just as hollow and underdeveloped as the rest of the season. She decides that she wants to leave a legacy worth leaving in one episode, and then in the next is just back to being a goal for Barry to achieve. It's really inconsistent, and the show clearly doesn't know what they want to do with Iris in this season. And while this plot isn't terrible, Barry saving Iris from the future, it relies solely on being a ticking time bomb until the finale. I think it's cool enough to see Barry want to try and change time, but as every episode goes by and you realize nothing's really changing anything, you just know that you're not going to get any resolution until the end of the season. The following episodes are also just utterly hogwash as far as I'm concerned. The Gorilla City two-parter is one of the most laughable sets of episodes in the entire show. Honestly, the two-parters in Season 1 and Season 2 were some of the highlights of the season, so the fact that the one we get in Season 3 is this bad is just honestly insane. The first part is a boring and meandering mess with characters just sort of sitting around in a cell while nothing happens. Meanwhile, on Earth 1, we have Wally and Jesse with terrible romance drama that I don't even want to get into. And then back on Earth 2, there's a literal scene where they discuss murdering Cisco. I'm not kidding. They're discussing murdering Cisco, and I'm supposed to take the scene seriously. And then I firmly believe Attack on Central City is one of the season's worst episodes. It starts with a really nice and wholesome vibe, but sadly completely devolves into one of the most boring and blatantly mischaracterized episodes of the entire show up until this point. There's a scene in the beginning of the episode where Jesse and Wally tell Harry that Jesse is moving to Earth 1 to be with Wally. Underdeveloped, but okay. Harry takes it super well and says his daughter's happiness is of utmost importance to him. It's great growth from Season 2, and I honestly love to see it. Too bad later in the episode, he fakes that he's dying to keep his daughter to stay with him, and then Jesse confronts him in the middle of a completely different scene.
Seriously? Huh? You told Wally you were dying.
Dying?
You're dying?
Or how about the fact that Barry wants to kill Grodd? Barry isn't just even suggesting killing Grodd out of necessity, he's weirdly bloodthirsty. He's suggesting that he should kill every enemy from now on, and I'm just so confused as to how we even got here. Barry stopping a nuclear bomb from crashing into Central City should be a big and cool moment, but it's just a footnote of the dumb gorilla episode. There are a few shining glimmers of hope here as far as episodes go, though. I think Into the Speed Force is a really fun way to bring back some old characters, and I always appreciate the show going wacky with Speed Force lore. Duet is just a classic, very fun songs, and it's also a great reprieve from the general tone of the season. And also seeing Martian Manhunter, Kid Flash, and Vibe work together to stop a villain is just way too cool. The season's penultimate episode is also extremely strong, and Fantino Street managed to bring some real stakes to the season-long threat, as well as give us a great team up between Barry and Snart. And that's it. Yeah, I think the rest of the episodes are incredibly lacking. Even episodes that have massive amounts of potential are completely drained of said potential. Episode 18, Abracadabra, features a terrific villain in the episode's namesake, and the action is fun and dialogue is snappy. But the episode is completely let down by the season's terrible decision to keep peddling the Savitar storyline further. It doesn't help that the episode goes from fun to veering into early 2000s melodrama within 5 seconds. It's honestly so jarring how we go from one of the most fun episodes of the season to everyone glumly looking around Star Labs. Speaking of melodrama, I haven't even talked about all the bad character work and drama that exists within the season. Don't get me wrong, I know this is CW's The Flash. Drama is always going to be here, and more often than not, it's going to be bad. But my goodness, it is so bad here. It's forced, it's dumb, and episodes like The Wrath of Savitar exist to show you how the season is content with having 30 minutes of cyclical drama, and then it'll do something cool. There are at least 2 episodes of the season that could have been very cool, but neither of them work because they need the first 2/3 to be filled with pointless drama. The first episode is episode 6, Shade. It has a cool idea of Wally being targeted by alchemy, and the climax involves him leading the cops to alchemy for a jump on him, and then Savitar attacks. It's a really, really cool idea for an episode. Too bad the first 30 minutes are about bad romance drama and a movie in the park. Even worse is the show's adaptation of Shade, and I will literally cry of anger if I talk about him longer. The Wrath of Savitar is a very similar episode too. Wally is targeted by visions of Savitar that try and manipulate him to make him go against the team to stop Savitar by himself. It's a great idea. Unfortunately though, the first 30 minutes are full of some of the worst drama the show has ever put out. Notice how both episodes are focused on Wally. It's almost like he's criminally underutilized this entire season. Kind of like every character. Cisco is horribly written in the first half and then a complete nothing burger in the second half. Following Barry changing the timeline, it turns out that Cisco's brother Dante died in a car wreck. He asked Barry to go back in time and stop it, and Barry refused. After Barry reveals that he saved his mom, Cisco is even more mad. I know grief makes you do crazy things sometimes, but the way they decided to handle this drama with Cisco was just terrible. And the fact that they don't even resolve it on The Flash, but in the third part of an alien invasion crossover just completely baffles me. Other characters will decide that they want to act completely out of character at the drop of a hat. One moment everything is fine with Barry proposing to Iris, and then the next Joe is furious that Barry didn't ask his permission. Barry himself is also completely mischaracterized this season. I mentioned him being bloodthirsty earlier, but that's not even the length of it. Gone is the Barry Allen that cares about people in his team, and his place is the shell of a hero formerly known as the Flash. He lashes out at everyone, treats his friends like shit, and is just overall a completely annoying main character to watch. And then there's Savitar. Savitar is by far the worst villain of the show. I know people hate Godspeed, Cicada, DeVoe, and of course the Speed Force, but Savitar has something that none of those had. The potential to be the best villain of the show. And around every corner, they squander that and deliver a villain that's just not good at all. He's barely in the season, and when he does show up, absolutely nothing happens of consequence. He is a plot device. He is a weapon to murder Iris. He is simply a looming threat that exists only for the show to have some form of driving plot. He's literally trapped in the Speed Force for the bulk of the season. By episode 15, it looks like things will change as he escapes the Speed Force and locks Wally away. Cool, things are going to be rocking now, right? No, because Wally is out the complete next episode because they rescue him, and Savitar doesn't show back up until episode 20. At episode 20, we reveal that his identity is future Barry Allen, and I have a few things about that one. One, that was probably the single most obvious reveal they could have ever had, and they waited until episode 20 to reveal it. And the consequences of that is that the show has to sift through so many cool ideas in only 3 episodes. Barry fighting a literal evil version of himself is cool. Seeing the origin of Savitar is cool. Seeing everyone react to it is cool. Unfortunately, episode 21, while solid, is glorified filler because Barry has lost his memory and Savitar is barely in the damn episode. I think Savitar is very emblematic of what makes every villain after Thawne feel so lifeless. He isn't a character. Thawne was a character. He had personality, motivations, and connections to those around him. He was fleshed out and existed within the season as more than just a page turner. Zoom was not a character. He was a faceless entity there to make Barry learn how to run faster. And following that, Savitar is also not a character. By the time he gains the potential to be one, the season has fucking ended. Not to mention that Savitar literally makes 0 sense. I'm going to cover my ass here for a moment, and I really don't care about logic in the silly Speedster show. There are going to be opinions I have about upcoming seasons that disregard logic, because I think that the storyline is still compelling despite that. The issue with Savitar is that the storyline isn't compelling at all and doesn't even make a lick of sense. You can't even have some magic headcanon that makes it make sense. You see, Savitar is a closed loop, what's known as the bootstrap paradox. He always exists. Savitar is born by Barry witnessing Iris die, and it completely breaks him, allowing him to become Savitar. That's all fine and good, except the season then continues to bury its head in the sand and make the storyline make even less fucking sense. The season convolutes it by mixing up which Savitar is which. It should go like this. Savitar goes back in time, cultivates a following and making myths about him to become a godlike deity. After that, he kills Iris, sending Barry into the dark. Barry creates time remnants to fight Savitar, and where Savitar kills all of them except for one. In 2024, Barry will trap Savitar in the Speed Force, and the surviving time remnants become Savitar. It's a compelling enough idea, and the fact that Team Flash has to essentially break a never-ending loop to save Iris is very cool. But then Savitar escapes in episode 15, and I think that breaks the loop. The Savitar that Barry traps in 2024 escapes in 2017. So now the timeline is Savitar kills Iris, Barry makes time remnants, Barry traps Savitar, one time remnant becomes Savitar, and then Savitar escapes prison. So now there's 2 Savitars running around, I think, and then the Savitar that kills Iris is the Savitar that escaped the prison, and by doing this, Savitar has essentially broken the loop, like I said, but he still needs to secure his existence by continuing the loop. And then Barry ultimately finds out who Savitar is in an admittedly awesome scene and has a confrontation with him. The issue here is, now that Barry knows that he is Savitar, all he has to do is decide not to kill Iris. Doing so would completely erase Savitar from existence. Even if he fails to save Iris, since he is Savitar, he can just not kill Iris. But that's when Savitar has his famous line: "The more you do it, the less the rules apply to you." Okay, show. Okay, you win. You win. You just win. You copped out and you win. I'm done. I'm done. And then there's the finale. This is a season that I don't think could have been saved from a great finale, but it would have allowed me to swallow it easier. Instead, we get what is probably the worst episode of the entire show. The first half is pretty solid, but it's got a lot of problems. I just love that it was trying something interesting. Redeeming Savitar is a brilliant idea. Barry mentions that love is stronger than hate. He created Savitar in the future by neglecting him, and they'll save him this time. It's poignant, it's raw, it's great, it comes completely out of left field, and I have to commend them for that. Following the HR sacrifice with us too is really good because that scene alone was already emotional. I felt like we were in for a great finale, especially because the trailer of the finale was really, really good as well. I know it's stupid to get hyped up, but that trailer was so hyped. I was excited the entire school week leading up to that episode. Unfortunately though, because this is the season of squandering potential and dropping plot lines, Savitar has a big heel turn. Turns out he's evil still and blows up Star Labs to run off and become a god of time or some stupid shit like that. I really don't know. He also kills Black Flash with cold. God, I could rattle off 100 different things about this episode. How come they needed Tracy Brand to make a Speed Force bazooka, but somehow Cisco turned it into a Speed Force skeleton key with relative ease? What does a Speed Force skeleton key even mean? Also, why doesn't Savitar vanish immediately? Eddie shot himself and Thawne immediately vanished, so why not Savitar? Again, they killed Black Flash, the Speed Force's entity of death, with cold. Why back out of a compelling finale idea for this? It'd be less bad if the finale fight wasn't absolute dog water. It's set in the shitty, cheap-looking forest, and the entire climax, the quote-unquote fight that people love so much, is a 15-second chase that doesn't even make sense. Savitar cuts down trees with his spiky hands, and Barry and Wally slide under them in real time for them. How does that work? Did the tree fall in time with the speedster? Did the tree fall at super speed? I don't know how that works. And then the season has the gall to have Savitar just say lines that make no goddamn sense. How exactly does killing Savitar make Barry Savitar? Like what? And then Savitar is just shot dead. Boop. It's over. I get it. It's parallel to the season premiere. It's artistic. Fuck off. And then the final cliffhanger, that melodramatic ass shot where we all know Barry would come back anyway, it's not even set up well because the Speed Force prison as an idea is bullshit anyway. Are there good aspects of season 3? Maybe? I don't think any of them are enough to counteract the bad. I guess Savitar looks cool and has a cool voice, but I mean, that's the same thing about Alchemy, right? There are a few solid episodes here and there, but they're either fine or what's good about them is undercut by a following episode making it worse in retrospect. For me, this season is every bad aspect about the show at its complete worst. Season 3 gets a 4.5 out of 10. Season 4. I can't not mention the fact that the show's 4th season was honestly one of the worst and most offensively terrible affronts to television that I have ever seen. And quite honestly, it turned the show into complete soap opera dog shit. You know what? Wait. Shit. That's the Arrow retrospective script. Anyway, I think the Flash season 4 kind of rocks. Look, the Flash season 3 sucked. It didn't make sense, the storyline was full of wasted potential, and it featured the worst villain in the entire show, and some even worse drama. Now, if this was Arrow, I would be saying that season 4 followed suit and only got worse. Except I don't think it did. This season is a huge step up from season 3, and while it's not perfect, it truly does feel like the writers wanted to shift things into gear and fix a lot of issues that people had with the series. You see this immediately going into the season premiere. People didn't like the ending of season 3 at the time, with Barry going into the Speed Force, so the writers undid it in a single episode. Caitlin's journey as Killer Frost was an unmitigated mess, so she's human and normal again in a single episode. The Flash Reborn is a completely apt title. This is the season where the show arguably changes into what it is for the remaining 6 seasons of the show. There's still some growing pains though, I won't lie. For one, while I'm all for undoing the entirety of season 3, since I think it sucked, I think the show missed an opportunity with Barry's exit from the Speed Force. I've often mulled over what makes this unengaging and what makes Supernatural Season 4 premiere the complete opposite. I think I've solved it. The main thing is that Dean's return in Supernatural Season 4 is riddled with mystery that you want to see solved, and eventually it gets pieced together. Unfortunately, Barry is immediately back into the fold, and we know exactly how it happened and when it happened, and it just would have been cool if he'd have shown back up on his own accord, especially since the Thinker was already organizing exactly when and where he would appear. I think the biggest and most evident change of the season though has got to be the tone. Season 1 was a beautiful melding of campy comic book goodness while never shying away from personal and heartfelt moments that ground the show and make you care about it. Season 2 followed suit, sometimes getting a little too muddled for its own good, but always coming out on top. Unfortunately, Season 3 went way too far into doom and gloom for me, and it becomes a pretty miserable outing. Look, I don't need for shows to be happy and uppity all the time. My favorite show is The Leftovers, and there's not a single cell of my body that was happy watching that show. However, Season 3's attempts to be darker just come off as immature and unfocused. The tone of this season is probably the lightest the show has ever been, and I think that's a great idea. I love the fluffy feeling of it, it's so fun, and there are episodes like Luck Be a Lady which genuinely feel like a sitcom at times, and I mean that as a compliment.
Sorry. So the water valve is in the crawl space? Don't ever go into the crawl space.
Vince, you know he's allergic to it. Shame on you.
We need to shame the little
No,
boy.
you're
What are the odds a pilot has a goose fly into his engine twice?
I think the first half of the season is hilarious. Now, I will say tonal inconsistency is definitely a problem. Too often the season will switch from one of the silliest things ever to a dark and extremely dramatic moment, and it doesn't work very well. This season also flies a little too close to the sun when it comes to being silly. There are several episodes, especially in the back half, where they try too hard to be funny, and the effortless comedy of the first half is gone. It ends up feeling incredibly forced. I do still think the season is pretty funny in the second half, but I think the season really peaks in the first 8 or so episodes of it.
Barry, what did you just do?
I just went and got peanuts from a bar.
However, some of Season 4's best episodes are those darker episodes. Therefore I Am, Don't Run, True Colors, and Lose Yourself are all episodes that get close to some of Season 3's melodrama, but they never lose sight of what the show is. On the flip side, Mixed Signals, the season's second outing, is just so damn enjoyable to watch. I can't help but love as the Flash inflates in such a goofy manner, but that episode also has a lot of great stuff with Barry and Iris to ground you. I don't care what anyone says, We Are the Flash is a great moment. Scaling things back for Season 4 was a great idea, and I think DeVoe's plan for the Enlightenment is a solid idea seeing it unfold over the season. And while it's a little stretched out, it's still pretty fun to watch. Sure, wanting to make people dumb is a little, well, dumb, but I think the execution of it is still really exciting to watch. It helps that DeVoe himself is one of the series' best villains, and I didn't used to feel that way. I think what helps is that this is the first villain since Reverse Flash that the show decided to actually make a character. Part of what makes Thawne work so well in Season 1 is that we spend time with him outside of his interactions with Team Flash. He's a fully fleshed out and believable character. The same can be said for DeVoe. For the first 6 episodes of the season, we get multiple episodes with both Clifford and his wife Marlize that do a lot to establish their characters and build up to the first real confrontation between the Thinker and the Flash. I love episode 7. It ramps up the season tremendously and illustrates the wonderful dynamic between DeVoe and Barry, as well as setting the groundwork for, DeVoe painting Barry as being some sort of lunatic that wants to kill him. It's also really cool to see Barry kind of go crazy and get so obsessed with stopping a villain because he's been tricked way too many times. It's a cat and mouse game that each has to wait for each other's next move. I just think it's fun that the catch is that DeVoe knows the next move. While this might be lame to some people, I find it weirdly compelling that DeVoe just has the script to the season, and it leads to some awesome moments where he's able to just demolish the team. Don't get me wrong, there are also numerous moments where Team Flash is extremely dumb, but there's some moments where DeVoe's genius is just pretty fun to watch. And let's not forget about how cool it is that the Thinker has all these meta powers by the end of the season. And don't get me wrong, it's not exactly what I'd expect from a character called Thinker, but there's so many cool moments where he's utilizing his powers in really fun ways, especially the opening of episode 22 of this season. That entire episode actually just features some really awesome use of powers from both him and Barry. I do need to address the elephant in the room when it comes to DeVoe though, and that is unfortunately the acting. Neil Sandilands is incredible in the role and he absolutely sells it for the first 9 episodes, but when the season transitions into the body swapping plotline, it loses a lot of what made DeVoe work so well in the initial chunk of the season. It's hard to take him seriously as I once did when he's played by actors that don't really deserve the bill of main villain. Luckily, once he kills Ralph and achieves his original body again, I think things come back around and he's still lost a bit of his luster, but it evens out back into being a really fun villain. DeVoe is just ruthless, but in a way that doesn't feel as overly edgy as Zoom did. He lacks any and all empathy, but not in a murderous rampage kind of way, just in the fact that he doesn't really care who has to die for him to reach his goal, and it's honestly really cool to watch. The main story of the show just transitions nicely through each section of it too. The first half actually handles Villain of the Week episodes in a really neat way by tying them into the main plot, since DeVoe made all these metahumans that need to be taken in by the Flash. It's season 4 by now, so it'd be easy to feel like the show has run its course as far as this formula is concerned, but I really like how they were able to tie the villains to DeVoe. It also helps that they're some of the most fun villains of the show as far as power sets go. While their characters might vary in quality, I think they all lend themselves to some really cool action moments. Kilgore's utilizing technology is really sick. Becky's luck powers are pretty cool. Being able to animate statues is a really neat idea with Black Bison, and Dwarf Star's shrinking shtick is funny because I think the action in that one episode is better than action in all 3 of the Ant-Man movies. Now, the format I do think wears itself a little bit too thin. Once we enter the middle of the season, a lot of my praise starts to wear off, and the episodes start to feel a bit contrived. Episode 14 is really dull and features an extremely boring version of the Fiddler, and episode 17, Nolan Annoyed, might be the most accurate title the show has ever put to screen. It's a completely nothing episode. Don't get me wrong, there are a few gems here. Run Iris Run, while it does feature one of the worst and most annoying metas of the week, it's an enjoyable episode, and I like a lot of the drama between Barry and Iris in it. And Lose Yourself is a big episode that kicks things back into gear, but it almost feels like it came a little too late. Enter Flash Time is the best episode of this middle chunk, and honestly the only one really worth talking about. It's just an extremely awesome portrayal of Barry's superpowers, and that's all you can really talk about. There's some great visuals in it, and it's easily a highlight of the entire show. And then True Colors is a pretty good end to Barry's prison plot. Speaking of, I really like Barry's prison plot. It's brief, sure, but it lends itself to a lot of excellent drama, and the character of Big Sur and his bonding with Barry is really cool, especially with the history of Henry being in the same prison. Barry getting out of the Speed Force was a bit too easy, so it's fun to actually place him in a literal prison. DeVoe framing him for his own murder is such a sick idea, and I think the trial of the Flash is one of the best episodes of the season, delivering an emotionally resonant climax and kicking the second half into gear. It's just unfortunate again that the middle of that season, once he gets out of prison, doesn't know where it wants to go at all. I think that's probably because showrunner Andrew Kreisberg was fired because he did some things that he shouldn't be doing with other. He has sexual assault allegations, and because he was fired, the showrunners couldn't use any of the storylines that he had planned, so they had to kind of come up with their own. And judging by when he was fired, which was around the first half of the season, I would have to assume that they already had around episodes 1 to 13 probably written, since he got fired around episode 8. The lack of direction after Barry's prison plot is probably the show trying to find some sort of direction to go, and I honestly think they succeed at it, and because the final chunk of the season is actually really great. Unlike season 2, which picks itself back up around episode 20 and then falls off for the finale, I think this season sticks with it and doesn't stumble with the finale. Once DeVoe kills Ralph and takes his body, the season is back into being as good as it was during the first half, except for Harry and the Harrisons. Episode 21 is terrible, it's dreadful. The season slams on the brakes for an entire episode dedicated to Team Flash helping a literal human trafficker just so Caitlin can try and get her powers, but who gives a shit, man? Episode 20 does a lot of great things with the character of Marlize. I really like seeing her character slowly change over the course of the season's 23 episodes, and the culmination here is really nice. Seeing her leave Clifford behind was cool, and I like how it shows that even if Clifford can predict anything in the world, he can't understand human emotion anymore. He's such a far cry from the man that he used to be, and it's honestly depressing to watch. Paralleling him is Harry, and honestly, Harry's arc just isn't very good. It kind of ends up in the opposite way by the finale, where he's no longer smart, and the Harry that was always cold and distant and locked off is now the most emotional Wells that we have. Unfortunately, they play a lot of his losing memory and intelligence for laughs and jokes, and it just feels a little tone deaf, and it's hard for me to actually find it funny. We Are the Flash, the season 4 finale, manages to tie so many things together and deliver a really fun season finale. The satellite set piece is awesome, taking down DeVoe is compelling enough inside his mind, and while the big Clone Wars fight might suck a little bit, I still think it's really cool, and the emotional connection to bringing Ralph back is really nice as well. Now that I've talked about the main plot and story beats, I should probably focus on characters, huh? Well, I think they're decent this go around. Barry's no longer a really brooding and boring leader like he was in season 3, but he's also nothing really more than he was in seasons 1 or 2 either. He sort of just stopped growing in the season and relies a lot on Team Flash, and while I'm not the biggest hater of the Flash having a team like some people are, it could be a little odd seeing him need that much backup. I think his rivalry and dynamic with Ralph is pretty strong though. Iris, while she never got much to do in the show's first 3 seasons, honestly really shines for me here. I know that's an extremely hot take, but I don't mind seeing her in a leadership role. Maybe it doesn't suit her the best, but who else would do it? When Barry was in the Speed Force, both Wally and Cisco were in the field, so it left only Iris to be there to help direct them on where to go and what to do. Speaking of Wally though, what the hell happened, man? I love him in season 2, and I think he's criminally underutilized in season 3. Seriously, they decided to give him powers finally, but instead of giving him powers the way they gave them to Jesse, they decide that he has to get them from Dr. Alchemy, and then he becomes a tree? After that, there's a solid stretch where he's really good, and him and Barry are a great team, but then he gets benched around episode 16 and never really comes back. And then he just leaves. He just exits the show in episode 3 for no reason at all. I've never understood this decision, but this really is the end of the road for Wally West. Aside from a few guest appearances going forward, this is the end of his character. It's a truly baffling decision and one of the weirdest of the entire show. Cisco's arc in this season is also fairly dull. A lot of it is tied to his relationship with Cynthia, which was introduced in season 3. While I do really like their relationship, especially in season 4, I think a pretty good exit for Cisco was actually within this season. Having him leave and go work with her on Earth 19 would have been a really cool ending for the character, and it would have made a lot of sense. As is, their breakup sort of just serves as a reason to keep Cisco around for another season or two, and it just doesn't really work for me, and he sort of feels kind of vapid at this point. Oh well, you know, at least him and Danny Trejo hamming it up together is fun to watch. Ralph, who I haven't talked about a lot, which is odd considering he's basically the season's main character, is pretty solid. He learns how to be a hero and not some sleazy douchebag, and he learns it 16 different times. I really do love Ralph. He's funny and entertaining, but the arc he goes through is entirely cyclical, and it ends up working out by the end, but I just think they could have done a better job of fleshing him out because it seems like they ran out of ideas. And then there's Kaylin, who I don't really want to talk about, but I know I have to. Look, season 3 dropped the ball with turning her into Killer Frost, and the season doesn't do much better at all. Suddenly, Killer Frost and Caitlin are like the Hulk and Bruce Banner, and that's not really interesting at all to me, but it gets worse when the two start communicating and treating each other as sisters, and it's just cringy, and then she ends up losing her powers, and what are you guys doing? Just let the character go. I'm done. And that's that. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on season 4. I think it's a really fun, if a bit uneven season of the show. It has a bit too many problems with its tone and being imbalanced, but I think it's a step up from season 3, and I think I like it a bit more than season 2. There are a lot of issues with stagnating characters, and I think the pacing can be a mess at times, and this is the season of the show where it really screamed to me that 23 episodes is just too much. When it works though, it's easy to just get lost in the sauce and enjoy the ride of season 4. It got too much hate when it came out, and unlike season 3, this is a season that I welcome people to reconsider their thoughts on. I give season 4 a 7.5 out of 10. I love The Flash. I know I've been fairly negative on the show after season 1, but I just want to reiterate and promise that I do love this show. I just feel like it came out swinging with season 1 and yet never really recaptured what made that season work so well. It's either the villains don't work, or the tone is bad, or the season is just utterly incomprehensible. However, I think season 5 is the first season since season 1 that is firing on every cylinder. If you weren't watching the show as it was airing, then I envy you, because being a fan of The Flash during the 2018-2019 season was not an easy task. This is one of the darkest periods of the show because every week I tune in and really enjoy an episode only to watch it be butchered to death by people online. And I know I shouldn't have cared what people online were saying, but it was hard because I like interacting with people that watch the show. It was even more baffling since me and my friends that watched the show all sort of agreed that this was the best the show had been since the debut. Finally, The Flash was able to manage the balance between spectacle and compelling stories, between drama and the whimsical nature of the show, and between mystery and consistent plotting. I felt like it was all here. Starting off, I just want to say how good this season premiere is, and just generally how good the first 3 episodes are. See, the season takes a really cool approach and basically splits up what would be a traditional premiere into the first 3 episodes of the season: Nora, Blocked, and the death of Vi. Doing this allows for us to not only get acclimated to Nora, the season's newest addition to the cast, a lot easier, but also works to expand upon the season's main villain, Cicada. A lot of people hate Cicada, and I'm not going to lie, I sort of understand why that is. For some reason, the CW decided to cast Chris Klein from the American Pie movies to be the big bad, and can't decide if that's one of the funniest decisions ever made or one of the worst, so I'm just going to say that it's both bad and extremely funny. Cicada is also a pretty drawn out villain, and one that escapes oftentimes when it wouldn't make sense for him to, and he just jumps away with his stupid jump, and yeah, there's issues with Cicada. And again, all that being said, I like him as a villain. If you watched my channel before and seen anything about season 5, you know this. It mainly just comes down to his character, which I think is pretty well written. From the jump, the show executes him in a really unique and interesting way, and we see him take out the metahuman baddie of episode 1 in the stinger of it, and episode 2 opens up with him at his job recovering from the fight. That episode also ends with a big confrontation between him and Team Flash, where he wipes the floor with them, and the episode's ending sets him up as one of the biggest bads the Flash will ever go up against. Honestly, the show keeps that momentum for at least a few episodes. Episode 3, the ending of the show's first little arc, does a good bit to flesh him out too, and by the end of it, it feels like we're ready to dive into Cicada as the season's main villain. Episode 7 gives us our first look at the man behind the mask, and I think it's generally a really great episode. Seeing Orland Dwyer take on the role of father to his niece and turn into a better person because of it, only to lose it all due to the actions of the Flash, actually make a lot of sense. It's a really great way to tie the season 4 finale into the season as well, and it's one of the strongest motivations for a villain yet. It's a lot like Thawne in season 1. It's a simple yet effective motivation, and you really do understand where he's coming from. I honestly really like that the show handles the fact that Cicada is a metahuman as well. When challenged on the fact that killing all metas would result in his death, Cicada simply agrees and says that when he's finished his mission, he's going to join all the metahumans he's killed. He's really just a man that has lost everything, and when Team Flash outs him as Orland Dwyer and he can't even visit his niece anymore, it elicits a feeling of sadness. His arc does get stretched out though. I think it would have worked a little better had he been dispatched in the season's 8th episode, which is also the series' 100th episode. It's a really strong celebration of the entire show, featuring some awesome moments, but the episode rings a little hollow when Cicada is able to just get away at the end of the episode pretty easily. The next few episodes don't really do much with the character either, but once we reach episode 13 or so, I really think they start to build a strong foundation again for him. See, one of the cool things about early Cicada is that the character doesn't really have a rivalry with Barry. He's simply a man on a mission and Team Flash happens to be in his way. Cicada is their villain, but they aren't his. It's a refreshing way to go about things, but I think the issue with that is that the longer the season goes on, the less that works. And by the time we get to episode 11, they finally start to try and build a dynamic between him and Barry. It's just an issue that it's one-sided, and it's still just Barry wanting to take down Cicada. Episode 13, despite being an extremely fun episode with Ralph and Barry, is a great episode for Cicada, as it features Iris investigating him outside of the suit. It was a great idea to have Cicada be able to be menacing without the garbs on, and it really proves him as a compelling villain to me. This is where Cicada finally decides that Team Flash needs to go. They've taken away his niece from him and now invaded his home and privacy. Episode 14 is a really cool time loop episode as well, but on top of that, it's a really solid episode for the villain of Cicada, really proving him as a threat. Nora bounces between timelines trying to get the perfect go around, and every time Cicada kills somebody on Team Flash, if not all of them. We've finally gone back to the Cicada that was so threatening earlier in the season. His redemption that he gets is also great in one of the season's best episodes in Failure is an Orphan. I really love that Barry is appealing to his fatherly side, and seeing him take the cure to help his niece is so good. It's just a great cap off to, again, a very strong character in the form of Orland Dwyer. Even if you don't find him as a villain super compelling, I think this character is a great character to exist within the Flash. I don't really have an issue with him, and I don't understand why people say that they don't flesh him out enough, because he's one of the most realized villains of the entire show as far as a full character goes. The concept of his niece from the future being a new Cicada is interesting, and I love the parallels with Nora, but in execution I don't think it's very interesting. I think the biggest problem with said execution is that Grace doesn't really do anything beyond her introduction in episode 17. After that wraps up, we even go right into Nora's backstory and with the reveal that she's working with Eobard Thawne. After that, Grace just sort of sits around and we get a truncated evil Nora plotline before Grace is back for episodes 21 and 22. You know, remove her from the season and focus on Eobard Thawne more, and I think the season is functionally the same and maybe a little better. Again, it's thematically resonant, it just would have been better without having her in the season. But on the other hand, the way the finale balances the tension with the release of Thawne in the future is just too good to pass up. Speaking of, I really love Eobard Thawne this season as well. Nora working with him was such a brilliant idea, and I love to see the slow seeding of her being up to something and Sherlock working to figure it out. It was just really cool. See, if there's one thing that was missing in season 4, I think it was a mystery. I get that's what harmed season 3, but part of what makes this show so engaging is seeing things be slowly uncovered. Well, if you're not doing a secret identity mystery, what do? Season 5 does this by the mystery of what is Thawne's plan. Why is he helping Nora? It doesn't make sense. The way it all ends up being tied to the dagger and that's what's negating his powers in the future is such an awesome way to ramp up the season for its climax. It's a little unfortunate though that Thawne escaping prison just sort of ends up doing nothing for the show as a whole. He doesn't come back again except for a brief stint in season 6, and I don't think that plot amounts to anything too much either. It was a great placement for the character to make him manipulate Barry's daughter, and it's just great. And speaking of Barry's daughter, Nora. She's another sore spot for a lot of people, but surprise, surprise, like most of the season, I love her. Jessica Parker Kennedy is such a phenomenal actress, and her energy is so contagious. Like Ralph last season, she's basically the main character this go around, and she works a lot better than Ralph. Seeing Barry be in more of a mentor role also allows him to grow as well. He's basically a seasoned hero at this point, and while season 4 didn't show that, season 5 definitely does, in my opinion. He's confident, more sure of himself, and it leads to some great moments in his and Nora's dynamic. Speaking of being more confident and sure of itself, I just feel like that's how the show is in general right now, especially in the way that it actually balances good drama. Iris and Barry get a lot of great material this season. Seeing the two grapple with having a daughter from the future is a little weird but strangely compelling, and it really puts the two through the ringer as far as their marriage goes. Barry's decision to send Nora to the future without asking Iris was such a big moment, and I think anyone that says Barry should have domestically abused Iris needs to be put on a watch list. Nora's arc is really the main plot of the season though. Forget Cicada, forget Eobard Thawne, it's just her. Seeing her grow and make mistakes and ultimately have to pay for them is such a great way to do it, and I really love how the show handles her being erased from existence by the end of it. It's such a tragic and difficult ending for the character, but one that makes a lot of sense, and it puts Barry and Iris into a really difficult place, and I like seeing them grow from that. It also helps that the season is chock full of fantastic episodes. There's a specific stretch in the season from episodes 12 to 18, and I think it may be my favorite stretch of the show up to this point. It's just banger episode after banger episode. Goldface introduces my favorite rogue, Goldface, and has some great stuff with Barry and Ralph. Cause and Excess is a fantastic time loop episode that again really brought Cicada back into menacing territory for me. And Failure as an Orphan is also terrific for wrapping up the Cicada plotline the way that it did. Do I wish it ended there? Sure. But it didn't, and what we get isn't terrible like so many people say that it is. I do want to say I think the final stretch is a little sloppy. Grace doesn't add too much, and what she adds isn't very good at all. Like I've said, I think Sarah Carter might be a worse actress than Chris Klein, and there are a lot of ideas here in the final stretch that are great and really would have been better if they were given enough time. I think execution-wise they're still good, but it does feel like they kind of zip-zap through a lot of them. It makes complete sense for Nora to go down the path that she does with the negative Speed Force. Her father just left her in the future and abandoned her, and Eobard Thawne has been essentially grooming her the entire time. Now it's about to pay off, and unfortunately it only lasts for one episode, and it's really just a B-plot for another Rogues episode. It's still a really great episode and one that I enjoy, but it feels a little cramped and rushed when it comes to the season's overarching narrative. It's really the season's finale, Legacy, that ties everything together. Much like Season 4, a great ending can elevate what's already there, but unlike Season 4, Season 5 was already on much sturdier ground in my opinion. Legacy is one of my favorite finales of the show. While Grace sticking around is a little messy at times, I think the tension presented in this finale is really great, and I love the pivot to Thawne midway through. I also think the scene where Grace is being convinced by both Cicada and the redeemed Orlin is really fun, and all of it culminates with Nora's death in a really fantastic way. It's pretty cool how both Nora and Grace die in the same way, complementing the thematic parallels that the show was going for. And I guess it's time to talk about the characters now. They're all pretty good this go around. I already mentioned that Barry is at his peak here as a seasoned hero and a mentor to Nora. He's fun, snappy, and has basically shed every bit of his season 3 moodiness. He feels like a natural progression of where he ended off in season 1, and I just really like it. I wish we could have gotten here sooner. Iris is also at her best here for me. Her maternal role with Nora is really well executed, and her starting off her paper finally was a great direction to take her. She feels like a character with agency and things to do while not leading Team Flash like in season 4, and I think it's a great middle ground. I've already mentioned how much I like Nora, but another great addition to the season is Sherlock Wells. I know a lot of people don't like him, and I really have no clue why. He's extremely funny and adds a ton to the dynamic of the season, including the mystery with Nora and the way that he uncovers that she's working with Thawne. He's extremely funny, he's an asshole, he's got a funny accent. Maybe the accent pisses people off, but I don't know, I like it. I just think he's a really entertaining addition. Unfortunately though, while I feel like Barry and Iris have managed to become their best versions of their respective characters, the same cannot be said for Cisco and Caitlin. Cisco's arc this season of creating a metahuman cure makes enough sense, and by the end of the seasons he decides to take the cure and give up his powers. I guess it works, even if it's just a little odd for him to decide to take it out of nowhere. I think the character of Cisco really spins his wheels this entire season, and it's a shame that he doesn't leave at the end of season 5, because I think he only gets worse from here on out. Caitlyn is honestly just a lost cause at this point. The season starts to set up something interesting with her quest to find her dad and what really happened to him, but it all collapses once we get introduced to Icicle, who is unfortunately a multi-episode recurring threat. Yay. He's just terrible. He's horribly acted. He makes Chris Klein look like a terrific actor. And I think the worst part is the back and forth that Caitlyn and Killer Frost have throughout the season. They're the same person, and seeing them switch constantly is just cringy. Not to mention that Frost doesn't want to create the metahuman cure since she's afraid Caitlyn might one day use it on herself. The just big issue with that though is the fact that the metahuman cure works by eliminating dark matter within their system, and Caitlyn, as established earlier in the season, does not have her powers through dark matter. That's why she can fight Cicada, so the cure wouldn't do anything to her. At the end of the day though, I think season 5 is a really strong addition to the show's ongoing roster of seasons. It's very strong thematically, it's got some fantastic episodes in it, it's cohesive in its storytelling, and it lends to some of the show's best moments and some of the best character work in the entire series. Cicada is a strong villain, but an even stronger character, and Thawne's return here is probably the character at his best in season 1. Overall, I'm gonna have to give season 5 an 8 out of 10. Alright, I really do hate to wrap the video up here, but I've already been yapping for far too long, and honestly talking about the remaining 4 seasons would probably kill me. It's a good stopping point here too, since longtime showrunner Todd Helbing exited the show at the end of season 5 to be replaced by Eric Wallace, who joined around the first episode of season 4. He showruns the final 4 seasons of the show, and I think it's a good idea to condense those final 4 seasons into one video, because a lot of themes and elements that he has will run all throughout all 4 of them, and a lot of storylines run throughout it as well. I also didn't mention any of the crossovers, and that's because I have a plan to do a big crossover retrospective as well. It's just too much to talk about, and I think that they deserve their own video, so I don't skimp over anything, because I have a lot to say about basically every crossover. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.